Hello, and welcome to another guide. This is my second take, unfortunately. Apparently I had my music on and it was being heard, and I didn't really notice that, so here we are again. Anyway, getting into this is my Immortal guide, and this is also going to be relevant for Guardian Defense as well. However, we're mainly going to be tackling it from the Immortal Juggernaut point of view. I'm not really going to do much, if at all, any editing for this video. I just want to get this out here so you guys can learn more so. It takes me a long time to edit these videos, and I just don't feel like it's worth it. I just want to have the information out there for you guys, especially if they end up changing anything. Most of the problems with video editing, it just, most of the time will take too long, and they've eventually either changed something or I just don't find the motivation to do so. Regardless, if you found this guide helpful, please let me know. I will definitely be happy to answer any questions if you guys have any. Other than that, let's get into it. Now, covering the first thing, this is going to be extremely important for everybody. Guard is your number one mechanic. So for example, this is what guard looks like. It does have a range limit, and it's very important that you use it. When it comes to guarding and who should be in range of the other, it's typically always going to be the tank that wants to be in range of the person that they're guarding. So for example, when it's in range, you can see this aura around them. However, if I go a little bit further, right, this aura will disappear. This means that they have an out of range guard icon. Now if I come closer again, it will disappear and I will be in range. Now, there's another mechanic too, is that when you start going down, a lot of the interactions with going down and up also cause extra range. So for example, in Tatooine Canyon, the mound is a guard bug area. The simplification of quote unquote guard bug is the fact that you're just creating extra damage from, or not damage, but distance from going up and down. It's not supposed to technically work that way, but in the real world, in reality, it does work that way. So just keep that in mind. Regardless, obviously guard, very important. I remap my caps lock to a different button on my keyboard, and I use that for targeting nearest ally. That's how I guard. I then put somebody on group frame 1 or group frame 2. Depending on your group composition, you can change it accordingly. So for example, if you're like group frame 1 or you're group frame 2, you can obviously change it to the other two. And then I focus target my healer. So you'll see something like this. So I focus target, and then I target my other two members, and you can't guard yourself, so no need to target yourself. If you want to do something for yourself, you can just hit tab, target an enemy. However, there's nothing we can really do for ourselves. But that's a simple way to kind of like control your targeting. And if that's difficult for you, I highly recommend just learning target nearest ally, and then just clicking your frames like manually. Now, other than that, you have taunts. So taunts will last for 6 seconds, and they reduce the damage of the person by 30%. So for example, if I jump into a 4 stack and I AoE taunt, everybody they hit that isn't me, they're going to do 30% less damage too. So in this situation, if we have like a PT that's sitting back, line of sight, I go in there and they're all cleave, and there's also like another DPS left me that I'm guarding. If I'm this PT, I can literally just throw my AoE taunt out there, and I'm saving all of them from taking so much damage. However, if my tank over there decides to overlap my taunt with an AoE taunt, he's now going to be taking a tremendous amount of damage. It would have been better for him to let my taunt overlap, because I'm not taking damage. They can't hit me anyway. I'm saving them from the opener. So that's one thing to think about it. I know that scenario is not practical, but it kind of explains how taunt works, and overlaps do not work. So for example, if I overlap your taunt, that means your taunt basically is irrelevant. It cancels it out. And now the last taunt that happened is the one that works. So just keep that in mind. That's a very important thing to know. Now, outside of that, your role, obviously guard, taunt, learning how to do damage. That's going to take a long time for most people. Learn how to do damage on your class, and once it's become muscle memory, then you can start putting that in the background while you're focusing on guarding, taunting, and controlling. And then pretty much outside of that, when it comes to being able to do damage and movement and just kind of like stay on target, especially since this class doesn't have as many mobility options as Immortal Juggernaut, for example, you kind of get to the point where you're coming towards mastery of the class, and you need to play against better players to really push yourself further, because for the most part, when it comes into regs, you're not really finding that challenge, so you're not going to get that. So playing a lot of arenas will be a really good way to get that experience that you otherwise just wouldn't. Embrace the handicap, if you will. So if you get somebody that's not really doing anything for the entire match, just take it as a 3v4 and see if you can win. Sometimes you can. Most of the time you can. If you play it well, you most definitely will. Other than that, that's kind of like the role of a tank, but also Juggernaut tank has a little bit more offensive power and a little bit more control than the other tanks. So that means that you have a high impact. You're very volatile, but you can also be killed a little bit easier than the other two. However, if you just skill gap the enemy players, you actually have a lot of potential to just carry and a lot of potential to pretty much put the odds in your favor. However, when it comes to comp versus comp, where there's both 4 stacks, you have a little bit less power, and whoever's DPS is better is going to matter a lot more. Now, there are some compositions that will make tanking a lot easier. So for example, someone decides to run self-scan. That helps you a tremendous amount. It's a recovery mechanic, just like force bound. So that's very helpful if you're late on guard swaps. That is a great thing to have with you to help you. Diversion's always super nice. And then you also have the accuracy buff on engineering boom. That's another great one. Even Assassin has a accuracy debuff, however, it's not really the best in slot, and Juggernaut doesn't really have access to that. So you're not comparable in terms of making up for shortcomings or just bad DCD usage or just slow guard swaps like the other two tanks have available for them. However, Sen, I would say, would be the one that would have the highest skill ceiling in order to actually play. So do keep that in mind. There are some niche situations where DPS isn't as important. However, at the end of the day, it really comes down to having players that have their defensives correctly, and then also know how to play their class. If somebody is going to go into an arena, so for example, if you're playing tank heal arena, and you have somebody that's not bopping their defensives, it is technically a ways to overguard them, because you're going to be sacrificing your cooldowns, you're going to be sacrificing your health pool, and eventually you're going to die because they don't play right. It's just a very bad situation to be in, and it's a very bad mentality to have. But it's definitely something you need to pay attention to, because sometimes people will need to be sacrificed for the greater good so you guys can win. There's a lot of arenas where I played where, you know, I will guard somebody, but there is a point where it is pointless for me to continue guarding them because they are not trying to save themselves and they're not using their defensives. So all they're doing is expending my life for little to no gain. That's where the skill ceiling starts to rise a little bit, especially in awareness as a tank. Can't just be tunnel visioned on doing damage and just guard somebody from 100 to 0. There is a thing as overguarding, and you will learn that in 8v8s very quickly. There's a lot of people that will not ever pop a defensive cooldown, and if they do, they pop them all at the same time, or they pop them in spawn. Anyway, enough with that rant. Let's dive into the next topic here. Alright, now going into our stats and gear. Let me go ahead and clear my focus target. We're going to be looking at our stats first, so we can just get this out of the way. This is my stats currently. I would say all the way down to 3600 critical is viable. So if you do want to run some mitigation, you can afford to. Typically mastery is just a raw damage increase. The reason why I'm not using these two, even though they say they're an upgrade, is that level sync does not actually make it an upgrade. actually gain some mastery and power for running 236 versions of these. However, every other 344 piece is actually an upgrade, but it is a very, very minor upgrade. You pretty much only gain 1 critical or 1 alacrity depending on the piece. So for example, this is a crit head piece. I'm only getting 1 critical over a 336 version of this. Very minor. I have it now, so I'm using it, but if I didn't have it, the difference is very small. You do not need it. Do not feel like you need to grind it out. A couple extra stat points. I think it was like total. When I last added it up, it was like 14 stat points difference in total. And it could very much so be easily fixed if they wanted to. Now going into our alternative builds outside of this, we have Retaliator's Impact, or Implant. This basically makes your Retaliation have no cooldown. You would run this with 10 seconds Amulet. This will allow you to get some rage back while you're spamming Retaliate. And then you also have the Reactive Warding Relic, and you would swap that out for the Power Relic. The main reason you would ever run this is for arenas where you don't have a healer. This will allow you to absorb some extra damage, but also allow you to absorb CC as well. So this is very vital when you feel like you need a little bit more extra survivability, but overall it's not that huge. The difference of having it and not having it is very niche, and there's sometimes you can get a lot of value out of it, and sometimes you get no value out of it. Or no value out of it, so it's really up to you. Now when you're running Retaliators and this at the same time, you definitely get a decent amount of mitigation survivability buff. However, sometimes Second Wind will give you a lot more survivability buff. However, going into the other tacticals here outside of Second Wind, you're pretty much just running the standard damage ones, but if you run Retaliators, you drop Champion's Precision. If you're going to run Second Wind, you also drop Champion's Precision. However, if you wanted to go both of these, you could. Would I recommend it? Not really. However, it's totally possible that you could do it and it wouldn't be too bad. Personally, I wouldn't do it. The 10% damage implant is very powerful, especially on this class, or not class, but smoke, because pretty much everything is wide damage. Other than that, let's go into our tacticals. We have Leviathan's Hide. This one really stacks well with the CDR Crushing Blow, so if you're able to get a Luck Thief, this is actually really good. And the damage reduction you can actually feel. Sin's second amulet is pretty much only used with Retaliators. There's no reason to ever run it outside that. Then you have Grit Teeth, which is your general defensive tactical. This will be any time that you don't have anything better, or you just need an auction house tactical. This is pretty good. There's some situations where this is very good if you're getting multi-hit abilities. So for example, somebody's playing Virulence and they're telling you, this is very good. Or they're playing Arsenal, or they're playing Carnage, stuff like that. Something that will hit you multiple times, so you can get a lot of ticks pretty much every single time there is a possible to get a cooldown reduction on it. And then Life Warden is a very niche thing. And then Biorhythm will increase the healing from your healing defensives. So whenever you're doing damage, you'll pretty much always have your healing stacks maxed out, which is a 10% buff to your next healing ability. So you can have your maxed out stacks for healing. So you can have 10% extra healing on Dirt Bane, 10% extra healing on Second Wind, 10% extra healing on Enraged Defense. That's actually pretty good. However, I wouldn't justify using it because of that, but it's an interesting mechanic. Other than that, that's pretty much your tacticals, your gear. For the most part, 336 is definitely just as good as what I'm using. Other than that, if you have any questions about gearing, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll be more than happy to help you. I also have a gearing video where I go over all the min-max for pretty much every spec, including your AUG layout and your enhancement layout. So if you just don't want to bother to do the math, I already have it sorted. Feel free to check out my gearing guide. Now going to the next one. Next one being defensive cooldowns. So let's start off with Aegis Shield. That's the most important thing that I can possibly teach you guys, is this right here. So when you do damage, it'll create a barrier protection just like static barrier to 8 allies within 10 meters of you for 6 seconds. So basically how that works is just like static barrier. This also applies to yourself. So for example, you can kind of like tie this with abilities like Thermal Detonator, Searing Wave, pretty much any offensive ability that you see coming your way, or you know like their internal cooldown of, so you can kind of like tie it with it every single time, is very good. However, you'll also be using it for rage building and making your Christian blow AoE, so do keep that in mind. However, if you do need the clutch save and you actually have it up, you can use it as a absorb. One thing to think about too as well is using it when you're using enraged defense. This pretty much guarantees at least 1 or 2 procs of your enraged defense without actually taking damage, so you'll actually get the full healing there, so you don't die through popping it at 10%. So one thing to think about, but is easier said than done, so do keep that in mind. You'll need some experience with the class and just some experience using it as well. Other than that, that is Age of Shield. Let's go into how our defenses kind of work. So we've got 2 different healing defenses. One lasts for 20 seconds. This means second wind gets a lot of value. And if you use Endure Pain, you kind of need healing within that 20 seconds. So whether you're using a med pack or getting a second wind proc, you do want to be mindful of actually getting that while you have your Endure Pain up. Otherwise you will flop over for using it, or just end up losing a lot of health. Now you have Enraged Defense as your other healing defensive. You can get the cooldown reduction to 1 minute and 30 seconds. It's very good. Typical rule of thumb is if the match is not lasting for more than 2 minutes, Bold Hatred is better. And 8s, pretty much Bold Hatred is usually your go-to. It's a lot of CC. Usually there's not a lot of damage. But if there's a lot of damage, Bold Hatred will end up not being as good as Through Passion. However, there are arguments for both depending on what's going on. But typically, rule of thumb for arenas, if it's not lasting for over 2 minutes, there's 0 reason to run Through Passion. Now with that out of the way, that's your 2 healing defensives. Your damage reduction, or some mitigation defensives. So you got 2 damage reduction ones. One will be Warzone in general, and the other one will be Invincible. Very good. Invincible is your best defensive overall. And then Saberward. So the ideal here is that when you want to knee-jerk a defensive, it should always be Saberward. Saberward is not amazing. However, the 20% yellow damage absorb is better than nothing. And then you also have the white damage reduction, which is very good. It's 50% defense chance for white damage. So if anybody is playing the non-meta specs, that will help you a lot. And then you also get 100% for 2 seconds when you first pop it as well. So that's really good for you against the non-meta specs. Really bad for the non-meta specs. However, that's usually not what's going to save you. Saberward's not going to be your saving grace. It is just something that you'll typically want to use sooner than later. And then Invincible is the big defensive that you have, and this is going to be able to save you from a lot of damage. This is something that you're going to have to learn to use slowly, as this is going to be probably the more difficult mastery when it comes to like using your defensives correctly, is using Invincible correctly. Sometimes you can use an opener where you know that your team is not going to pop defensives, and you're going to get absolutely shredded through guard damage. Or you know that your team's not going to taunt. Typically, if your team is not very good at Invincible in the opener, it's usually the band-aid solution to prevent you from getting absolutely destroyed in the opener. However, there are other times when it is coordinated play. Invincible is better to save for later when the damage windows are too high and you need some relief for your healer. So typically thinking about pairing your defensives equally amongst your healing. So for example, if you're not playing with a healer, you get 3 health bars. Basically how that works is that you're going to have the health bar that you already have. So using Saberward with this health bar is ideal. And then you'll have Enraged Defense, and using, after you get full health from Enraged Defense, using Immortal, whereas Invincible will be ideal. And then using your last one would be Endure Pain and Medpack, and usually saving a journal for that is pretty good. However, if there's any gaps in between that, you can actually buy time in order to get a second Enraged Defense, especially if you're running through Passion and the game lasts for more than 2 minutes. So do keep that in mind. You're kind of like playing around trying to get your Enraged Defense back, if that makes sense. Now, with that out of the way, if you guys have any questions about defenses, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'd be more than happy to help you. I do have a video dedicated to defensives alone. So feel free to check that out if you are interested in that kind of thing. Other than that, let's go ahead and jump into the next part here. All right, now we're going to briefly stop at retouching up on the topic of team mitigation, peeling, and I suppose guarding in a way. When it comes to talent choices, you can take overwhelming slashes, which is the ravage route. So there are some situations where having the ravage route is a lot better than the slow on force screen or the extra damage on force screen, because it allows you to keep somebody in place. And this also makes it a lot easier for you to bully somebody. Juggernaut is a natural class that is designed to bully players. So having extra control means that you're able to lock down people so they can't do as much as what they want. So one thing to keep in mind is taking that talent, and then the cooldowns for controlling somebody would be choke, backhand, and force push. These three abilities are incredibly useful, but also being able to get a reset on your leap on force push. So if you leap to somebody, push them, and leap to them again, that's a decent amount of lockup time where they can't really do anything to stop you. However, at the same time, it buys a lot of time for your team, and it also is an excellent tool at getting the tank separated from their team in order for your team to collapse on one of the DPS. Now, it's a very important thing to keep in mind is that if you ever want to get out of force push, and you have to get out of it, for example, you break it midair. You don't break it any other time. You only break it midair as you first get hit by it. You do it any other time, you're stuck with the recovery animation, and it would have been better that you just didn't even break it in the first place. So if you're ever going to do that, you have to do it immediately, and you can immediately follow it with something like leap in order to break the midair animation. Other than that, the other two are just basic stuns, not much to think about. Then you also have a grenade. So these things are something that you do want to keep in mind at all times. Your choke is very valuable. You don't want to just waste your choke on white bar. You don't want to waste it on immunity. Same with backhand. Typically the way that you want to pair your CC is when your team has burst or you have burst and you just want to control somebody during their polarity shift or their explosive fuel or whatever offensive cooldown they might have up at the time. It's a great shutdown tool, but it also is a great way to secure burst. And sorry if you hear my stomach. I haven't had breakfast yet this morning, but I'll probably have breakfast after this. I didn't realize it was that loud. But anyway, definitely keep in mind about how you use your control. I know a lot of people will just use it rotationally. Not a great thing to do unless you're playing Rex. But even in Rex, it's not a great thing to do. It is a lot of control, however, you can put on somebody, which is very helpful. However, is not necessarily good to use it as a damage ability, as your vicious slash actually does a incredible amount of damage, and you should be just using that instead. Now, when it comes to guard, I've shown the guard range, I believe. So whenever you go out of range, it'll have the icon, and then the guard bug. One thing to think about is when it comes to guarding, just over guarding as well. It's an important topic. Then how taunts work and taunts overlap. It's another very important thing to hammer in. Make sure you understand how that works. Last taunt to go into effect is the one that works. And then for team mitigation, just overall, the way to think about that is that when should you use your intercede? Your intercede on top of guard. It's not a terrible thing to do. So one thing to think about too is if they're swapping between two different players, one person doesn't have cooldowns, the other person has cooldowns. The person without cooldowns should most likely have guard. But it does mean that if you ever get separated from that person and they don't have guard, they are screwed. So most of the time, if somebody has cooldowns and they haven't popped them yet, it's much better to put the intercede on the person that has cooldowns but just hasn't had a reason to use them yet. Is to put the intercede on them and then guard the other person and stay with the other person. However, if you know if the person really needs help and there's potential chance for you to be separated from them, it's better to intercede the person that doesn't have defensives and guard that person, because the other person will have defensives if something happens to them. So as a way to supplement when your team doesn't have defensives, you have taunts, then you also have intercede, which will help your team survive a lot more. So one thing they always keep in mind, it's very powerful. And you can even take this talent right here, which will give you an extra 10% damage reduction to your allies. However, you do lose the root break, however, which is a bad trade, in my opinion, but the 30% damage reduction is very powerful, especially if there is no, there's no, how to put it, healing going out on your team. So like if you have a lethality operative, having that on them and you're just like 2vxing, that's very powerful, or like a PT. Overall, it's really a thing that you'll use where you know that you're not able to do much, but they will be able to, kind of thing. Now, another thing to also be watching, so for example, when it comes to guarding people, so when you have group frames 1 and 2, like keybound, you have your focus target modifiers, so you have your healer here, you can see all 3 people, and then you can also see your own health bar. Your own health bar will also be there as well. It's good to have your debuffs on so you can see like, oh, this person has a thermal det on him, then this person has net on him, but he isn't getting hit. So obviously in this situation, like, oh, net is, oh, he's fine. This guy's 50%, he's got thermal. You're obviously going to guard the thermal. Being able to see stuff like that is very important. So you'll be able to see like who has got storm watch on them, who's got thermal on them, who's got tracer missile debuff on them, stuff like that. And you can also get other information like, is this person playing primed ignition? You'll be able to see the dot. Is this person playing burning bright? So you won't see the dot and you'll see somebody's health spike drastically. So there is a lot of information you can actually get from watching health bars and then all the debuffs that will also show up. So you can kind of predict when the damage is coming. So for example, if somebody's playing shock bomb, you're going to see all 3 dots show up or be freshly applied, and that would be the time to guard. Other than that, that's pretty much the last topics that I really want to brush up on for like mitigating and just a team strategies. Other than that, let's go into a quick brush up on your offensive kinetic rotation. So one thing that you want to think about, typically if you're going to go for a max damage opener, especially if you're using overwhelming offense, let's say there's a dummy here. I could go to the dummy, but I don't really feel like it. We'll use a saber throw. So that'll be your first ability, and then you'll be able to leap. And then you can immediately go into Ravage. So you would saber throw, leap, Ravage. There's 3 abilities, that's 3 stacks over on offense. Ravage ticks more than once, so you can get up to 4 stacks to 5 stacks from just that alone. If I remember correctly, otherwise, no, I think it is just counting as 1 stack, even though it hits multiple times. Then you can immediately taunt, use Aegis into threatening rage, which should be enrage, and then crushing blow. So the whole ideal here that would happen is that you get 1 overwhelming stack, 2 overwhelming stack, 3 overwhelming stack, 4 overwhelming stack, and then when you pop taunt with enrage, that'll be your 5th overwhelming stack, and then you can immediately go into crushing blow of 5 stacks. And you have optimal opener, and you're still in your relic windows unless you get your relic procs on your saber throw. And then in that case, just skip Ravage. That would be your ideal opener for maximum damage. However, you can also time this with crowd control. But that is the number 1 thing that you always want to think of for doing optimal burst. And then when it comes to just pulling out burst as your let's say CCing somebody, typically opening with Ravage. When somebody's CC'd, that means none of the ticks of Ravage will miss, so you can get a free Ravage with none of the damage losing, like missing, because the extra ticks of Ravage do have a high chance to miss. And then you can immediately go into taunt, enrage, and crushing blow with retaliation. That'd be the ideal like mini burst window. And then obviously after you leap, you also get a dispatch, which is vicious throw. When it comes to filler, you're looking at using force scream, force smash. You really want to hit everybody with force smash. That'll apply an accuracy buff to everybody. That lasts for 45 seconds, so it is generous there. Sweeping slash is mainly for applying trauma and catching people out of stealth. But vicious slash will also do the same thing. It won't catch people out of stealth, however. It will apply trauma to single target. So if people are stacked up, you can get a sweeping slash every now and then to apply trauma to everybody. When it comes to trauma priority, you're looking at putting it on the tank and you're looking at putting it on the main target. This means it makes them harder to heal, especially if they're both in danger or they're already actively guarding that target. That means the tank will die that much faster. And then outside that, Vicious Slash is your main filler. It's a very hard hitting ability. A lot of people will just forego using it completely and they'll just do no damage, but Vicious Slash is actually a lot of damage. And having the Force Scream AoE is also a lot of damage, excuse me. However, there are times that you just want to have the Ravage Root instead. But other than that, that's pretty much how it goes. And then when you have Retaliator, you're able to do something like auto attack into like Diversion, and you get a whole bunch of retaliation procs or Saber Ward. Obviously, there's an internal cooldown on that, so you're not able to spam it a crap ton of times, but you're still able to spam it a decent amount of times. So do keep that in mind. Defense chance, defensives become kind of useless against Retaliators. And then counters like Throwing Arm aren't as impactful on you as well. Other than that, that's pretty much kind of like your offensive kind of priority. You always want to be trying to syncing your burst together, but also at the same time using your Vicious Slash as your main filler and Force Scream and Smash off cooldown. Other than that, if you have any questions for like trying to optimize your damage a little bit better, feel free to ask me. I'll be more than happy to help. We'll go ahead and tackle our next topic here. Now going into another part where it's really important for like playstyle and where you're positioning. So for example, if you're playing on Mando Battle Ring, for example, just say this is mimicking the Mando Battle Ring here. Obviously you don't want to be like around the edges. The only reason you ever want to be around the edges is if you know somebody is going to be going to the ledge for you to intercede back up, or you're going to be able to lead back up, or somebody's going to pull you back up. You don't want to be around the edges because it makes it too easy for you to get knocked off. However, those situations where you can get back up, you can kind of use that as an advantage. So if another melee comes up to hit you, they can actually get knocked by your allies. And if you get knocked as well, you can just get back up. That can be a very big advantage for you, but at the same time, you just always want to be mindful, where can you get knocked to? Like, let's say there's a sniper right here. Obviously, if I'm on that side, I can get knocked pretty far. I don't want to be on that side, so I want to be on this side where the pillar is. So if he does knock me, I'm just going to get knocked up against this. Not a big deal. I'm still probably going to be able to reach them. Positioning is very important as a tank, because if you're getting constantly knocked, you're getting moved out of guard range, your team's going to suffer for that. So positioning is another important thing outside of just watching your allies. So you try to make sure that you kind of know where your character is. Very important. And then the aggressiveness of a confident tank is very important. People just naturally perform worse when they have to be reactionary. So just playing aggressive in general, even if you're not making the best moves, chances are they're going to make a mistake, because most people are not very good at reactionary gameplay. So being confident and being aggressive is a highly valuable asset, especially on Juggernaut tank, because that's what the class excels at. It's very good at doing that. It's very good at shutdown. It's very good at control. It's just very good at being in your face. Now, a Jug tank's role, just especially a tank as overall, is to be the front line, be the controller, be the person that's going to shut down the priority targets. For example, if there's a polarity shift lightning sword in the corner, recasting, they really want to do something about that, and they're going to need a DPS to help them. So at any opportune moment, they should be going after that person and helping the DPS dispatch that person relatively quickly. Juggernaut's going to be the best one to do that. The other two tanks are not going to be able to handle it too well. However, they will have pools which will inevitably help them as well, but for the most part, Juggernaut's going to be better at doing that. So if you ever were to play 8v8s and you had another tank, you should be the priority at dealing with that, rather than trying to cleave when your cleave is just not anywhere near as good as Darkness or PT, though it is arguably better than PT these days because they just don't like PT, I guess. I don't know. They kind of like gutted PT damage. But when it comes to Darkness, like you're not competing with Darkness. It's just not possible. Deal damage AoE, that is like the size of a room. It's just not happening. Other than that, being a frontline and just being confident is a huge buff. It is something so simple, something so skillless that is taken for granted. The Though, do keep in mind, you know, if you don't have any allies to help capitalize on your aggressive playstyle, it's going to backfire, which is more so on your team. It's not on you, it's more so on your team. If people are not going to capitalize on the free casting time, which is why I tell you guys it's so important to learn your parse rotation, to learn your burst opener rotation is so incredibly important. Anytime that you can get to free cast, you want to maximize your damage input because it maximizes the value of somebody sacrificing themselves or just playing aggressively and having to burn through their cooldowns a little bit more quickly. It does mean that all eyes are on them, no eyes are on you. So therefore, there is no reason for you to make a mistake in your opener or your rotation because you are under no pressure. From your point of view, you're just free firing. And from their point of view, they're getting free fired on. You don't want that. You want to help them. Regardless, that's just a playstyle thing. You really have to understand the psychology of being aggressive, and then also how to excel in skirmishes where you're outnumbered and how to properly shut down people. But you have a lot of the tools to do so. Grenade is also something that, you know, as people like frown upon, some people do. I'm sorry, unfortunately, when you get pruned and a lot of the CC is just removed from the game, grenades still have a place in the game. They're not pruned, they're still here. So you can use a seismic grenade to get your fear back. Don't see that as a downside, honestly. I do wish that, you know, we just had those abilities back. There is really no reason for these ability selections to exist. You should really just give us all these abilities back. Just delete this row completely, give it back. And then if you want to have the talented versions of these abilities to come back, put them back in the tree, but just give us the baseline ability back and then give us the talents for those abilities back. That'd be great. It's really silly that we're in this situation. And grenades should be far less frowned upon nowadays compared to what they used to be, because grenades are now the only way to get some of the access that we used to have back. Other than that, that's pretty much the last things I want to talk about playstyle and positioning. Being aggressive is extremely important to Juggernaut, so do keep that in mind. If that is not something for you, then maybe don't play a Juggernaut. You probably have more luck at playing Power Attack because it is more defensive, or you would have more fun playing, not Power Tank, Darkness, my bad. Darkness is a little bit harder to play, but it is also very fun. I do have a guide on both of them, or not both of those, but for Darkness. Power Attack Tank, I'm probably not going to tackle, just so you guys know. Now we're going to go to pretty much what most people want to know about is my talent choices. So for example, Aegis Shield, I think is always the best talent choice. There are sometimes that the damage reduction is pretty nice. If you're going for damage, Taunting Strike is better. However, Aegis Shield's value for your own survivability and your team's survivability is unparalleled. There's something that's really going to compare to it, and this is probably one of the best things that Juggernaut Tank has to offer for its team. And then when it comes to this talent row, Path Carver, not worth it. 15% additional damage. It's really just not that good. Super Slash isn't the ability that does most of the damage for this class anyway. Vicious Slash and Crushing Blow are going to be your leading damage. If you're looking at highest overall damage, if you have AoE Scream, you're going to be looking at Crushing Blow, Retaliation for Scream. It's going to be your top computers for highest damage, and it's going to be Vicious Slash. So any situation that you want to take overwhelming slashes, which is going to be a Ravage Root, it'll be focusing a little bit more on skill target, and it'll be Vicious Slashing a lot more. So this is the ideal control build if you want to run that. However, if you're going to do it like team control, the AoE slow is very powerful. You can actually see how slow people start moving after you scream. And it's also a lot of extra damage. Then going into your next line here, the Taunt Crushing Blow is very good because it gives you a lot of on-demand burst. But if you're playing against a lot of heavy armor targets, the damage increase from the extra taunt is, or from this talent in general, is not that much. The damage that you would be doing with just the extra critical hit chance and cooldown reduction on your Crushing Blow is going to be not as different. So these will be closer than they seem. 20% extra crit chance is just meaning that you're going to crit more often. And each time you crit, you get a reduced cooldown on your Crushing Blow, so you get more value out of your Crushing Blow by having it up more often versus being able to hit slightly harder. So there are some situations where a critical blow is going to just be naturally better, especially if Leviathan's hide and you're able to get a lot of cleave. However, if you're not able to get that, it's better to have the more on-demand burst if you need it. Then this talent row, pretty much never run the middle one. You either run Reckoning for the extra damage reduction for your ally, so if you don't have a healer, this is very helpful for a power deck, it's very helpful for operative. It's just really helpful for anything that can have a chance to recover or just needs some extra time to get something done and get a second one proc. And then War Machine's usually the natural baseline one that you'll run because it'll give you more uptime on Champion's Precision, but also give you extra mobility and give you a re-break. And then the rest of these are pretty much standard, pretty much the same as every other spec for Juggernaut. However, through Passion will be taken if you ever get into a match that lasts for longer than 2 minutes. Other than that, that's pretty much your talents. I don't really swap those up. For those that play defense, I will show you the loadout for defense. So this is your warding shield. So this will basically do the same thing. Scream or Ravage Root. Taking the critical hit chance 1 here, but you would probably want Crushing Mark. This is the critical defense, and this is Reckoning. Or no, that's not Reckoning. This one is Reckoning, and then that one's not. So Thwart would be the one. Then this is kind of like the rest of that. So if you guys are curious, there's for defense, but overall your talent selection is not too crazy. You don't really swap things too often. It's a lot of fun to run Critical Blow when you're playing 8v8 as well. But overall, you're not super crazy in cleave. I've done a lot of cleave damage. I've done a lot of damage just in general as Jet Tank. That's something that you should really learn how to do. If you want to be a proficient Jet Tank, you really need to know how to optimize your damage. A lot of the Juggernaut tanks are just not really doing that much damage, and the ones that aren't really guard swapping as much as they should be. It's a fine balance between, like, when you're against good players, you're going to have to guard swap a lot, so your damage will go down. It's just a natural thing that's going to happen. You find a balance between damage, control, and guard swapping, and that's really where the skill expression comes from. Alright, now going into the funnel bar here. We go into our basically a summary and outro. Sorry, I made a lot of mistakes making this in one take. I haven't tackled a guide, much less talked much in a while, so do forgive me. Main thing that I want to go over again, it's very important. If you have access to either a Corsair or Vaser, or just like the ability to remap keys in general, remapping your caps lock for target nearest ally is going to help you a tremendous amount. Setting up your keybinds for targeting group allies is actually incredibly useful. I can go over that real quick. There's a targeting here right here. So it should be group member 1 and 2. So for example, I've already got 1 and 2 bound. I don't actually use these keybinds anymore. I'm not sure why it says that, but you know, this is the whole idea of that is hitting shift 1 and shift 2. Or I would be on my mouse. So 1 to 6 is on my mouse, so it'd be 1 and 2. So shift 1 or shift 2. That'd be how I would do that. And then I would swap it for whatever slot number that I need to. If you keep the same composition the whole time, your group frames will always be the same. And then for going into how guard works, so for example, let's focus target this person real quick. So we're going to slap guard on them. Well, I should target them as well. We're going to slap target guard on them. So that's 1 button press, and then I'm going to remove guard. That's 1 button press. Now, if I want to swap guard from somebody, let's see if I have another NPC real quick. Is this one guardable? I don't know. About to find out. Yeah, it's guardable. Okay, so I want to guard this person. So I just hit guard once. It does guard them. Now, there are some instances where it will take longer. Sometimes you might need to double tap it. Super weird how that works, but one way to get around this issue, if you ever feel like you have to double tap it, usually double tapping is going to remove the guard, but just in case, if you ever have this issue and you notice this a lot in PvP for you specifically, I notice this a lot myself as well, is to just tap it while you're targeting an enemy. That'll remove guard, and then target the person that you want to guard, and then guard them, instead of just doing this. Obviously, this is effective, but if you're spamming it back to back, you're not really respecting the global cooldown. So, for example, sometimes you'll get basically what's happening with the guard is that you're not getting the animation for the GCD, but that's basically what's happening. You tapped again and then the GCD will actually go. Super weird. I don't like it. I don't understand why it's like that, but you'll see it happen every now and then. You'll kind of understand what I'm talking about there once you have some experience with it. And then some people already probably know what I'm talking about. So just to keep that in mind, I like to just drop it before I'm about to guard somebody else. Not always the best solution, but it is something weird that you'll have to interact with. That's how guard works. Now, other than that, damn, my stomach is really growling. Jesus. Overall, I would say for tank, you are an extremely high stress role. There is no surprise why nobody wants to tank. Don't be surprised if people don't want to tank for very long either. It's a very stressful role. However, it can be made a lot easier when your allies play around you and try to play in a way that benefits you to make it a little bit easier, like calling out, hey, I need guard, or just in general, playing it alone. It's a lot easier to just keep guard in one person. I know that it's a lot easier. However, there are times where some people will need guard, and that's where a lot of the stress comes from, constantly trying to keep track of that. So do take it with patience. Do take it slowly. Don't try to expect to learn everything all in one go. And there is very low forgiveness overall, especially if you want to play arena as tank. So do keep in mind, people are going to berate you if you're not guard solving. You're not going to find people being very happy with you if you're not able to react well as to guard swaps and trying to keep track of like who's doing damage, what's going on. Yelling at your team because they're not staying close to you is not a good way to deal with things. There's a lot of people that actually will do that, and if they just guard, like some players are good enough that they'll just say, hey, guard me and we'll win. It'll literally be that easy sometimes, but not all the times will it be that easy. So do keep in mind, if somebody says that, chances are they probably know what they're talking about, so just listen to them. And then when it comes to mastery, movement is probably one of the most important things to master. And on top of that, just positioning. Those two things are very important. There are situations where you can bait enemy tanks, bait other players just in general. And there are ways that you can get people isolated as well. Worst push is probably your best ability to really try to understand how it works in order to like close out games. So for example, if you're ever force pushing the tank, pretty much doing it on cooldown is very good, but getting a really good force push at the opportune time is far more important, as well pretty much guarantee the closeout of the game. Other than that, there's pretty much nothing else that I can really include here. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll be more than happy to help. This is definitely my first tank guide where I just kind of go over everything. I know that I don't really show any gameplay footage here. It's more so of a listen long, and some things I do show on talents here. I'm sorry for that, but it's honestly just easier for me to do. I could get footage, but it would just be an investment of many hours that I just don't find it to be worth it. Other than that, you know, if you guys want to see another class next, let me know. I know that I already have Carnage done, so I could just drop in, do Annihilation and Fury real quick and finish that class as well. Or if you guys want me to see me to just tackle another class first, let me know. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'm gonna go eat some breakfast before my stomach like decides to go absolutely berserk, because it has been going for like the past 30 minutes. Hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you guys again soon.